Hello, everybody. We have two great experts and one person with a lot of opinions, which is why I'm the moderator here. So my name is John Solomon. I'm with the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. I was asked to moderate this panel probably because I will not shut up to Caroline and JC about disinformation and why I believe it is one of the, if not the most destructive and serious challenges to modern liberal democracy today. It's about more than 35 years into Silicon Valley technological developments, and we're not even really at the point where we have figured out how to deal with a lot of innovation like social media, let alone the rise of AI and LLMs, whether centralized or distributed. We have a lot of massive geopolitical challenges, some of them more kinetic than others in the last few weeks, if you've been paying attention. And on top of this comes this convergence between disinformation, misinformation, so wrong, erroneous information, and disinformation, active, falsehoods being introduced as part of FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference, and electoral manipulation and targeting of individuals as well, whether in politics, whether in the economy, etc. Today, with me, we have Andrew Dudfield from the European Fact-Checking Standards Network and Anthony Lebel from Label 4 AI. Unfortunately, Kalina Boncheva, who is a researcher at the University of Sheffield, couldn't make it today, so we have a little bit more space for our panelists to discuss. What I would like to do is lead off with each of you in turn, maybe starting with Andrew, if you could introduce yourself. What do you do? Who are you? Why that's relevant here? And also, what are, I think, a couple of the major issues? So not necessarily just challenges and threats, but also topics that we should be thinking about in the combination of artificial intelligence and disinformation specifically today in 2026.
Hey everybody, it's a big old question. Hi, I'm Andy. I have two jobs. I am the head of AI at Full Fact. Full Fact's a fact checker based in the UK. We're an independent organisation. We're accredited every year. We're reviewed so that we are classified as an independent fact checker. And my role there is to do two things. It is to produce software to support the processes of fact checking. That's not to fact check with AI. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. But it's to make sure that fact checkers who are journalists have access to the best technology in the world to make their jobs as easy as possible because they've got a really hard job. And fact-checking is about finding claims online, assertions, specific things said by people at a time in a place, and verifying that information in a transparent way so that anybody else who reads that fact-check can see, follow along the process and come to their own conclusion. Ideally, the same one we came to, but we're not telling people what to think, we're showing some working out. And we produce tools. We produce tools using AI to help understand what's happening online because I'm not sure if any of you have seen the internet, but it's really big and that's a problem. So we try to identify the most important things to fact check every day and we base that on a definition of harm. Harm for us being if something is false, it's believable and there is a consequence that somebody can take. So is there an action that they can do based on that information? So is it going to make you stop taking the medicine, start taking the medicine, change who you vote for, decide not to vote, not buy the product? Those are the kind of things that we're interested in and being able to identify those at scale across what happens online. And we produce some software. That's a software that is it's a relatively small field, but probably the most widely used fact-checking software in the world. About 50 or so other fact checkers all around the world are using that to help them identify the things to check as quickly as possible. I also have part of my role which is speaking to tech platforms, and that is part of formal partnerships. We're an organisation that works with Meta on a paid basis. They pay us to fact check content on their platform, but also partnerships with large platforms like Google and increasingly AI companies as well. And that is to think about how do they source and use our content in their work. In Meta's products, if you try and share something that we have fact checked, a little screen pops up to say, are you sure you want to share this? It has been reviewed by an independent fact checker. Doesn't stop you sharing it. It's not censoring you in any way, but it's just adding a bit of context. We find that's a very, very useful way for having an impact on our work. And when it comes to large language models, we're just very, very interested to understand how quickly do they pick up the content that we use? And I don't mean the underlying model that trains every few weeks or months, but I mean the inference time, the stuff that wraps around it to make it as good as possible. Broadly speaking, they're picking up our fact checks within an hour or so, quick as SEO. You know, it's appearing, our content appears, and it changes the responses that we see. And we have a big structured process when we're publishing fact checks. We check each of the large language models just using APIs to see what response it does before we publish our fact check and afterwards, so we can record this really quickly. And I'm also then part of the European Fact Checking Standards Network, just very briefly. That is the industry body of fact checkers in Europe. They are the accreditator, so they are the people that we apply to decide who is a verified fact checker. That's very important. That's how tech companies choose to place trust in organizations. And we do an advocacy around EU policy, and also relationships with platforms. And one of the things I'm interested in talking about here is centralizing our data as well, to try and make sure that the fact checks that we publish, those really important bits of data, are as useful for as many people as possible. And so I'm really interested in how do you grapple with the challenge of there's a huge volume of content online, some of it is false, some of it is AI generated, not all of it is harmful. And so how do we ensure that we have the focus on the most important bits? And then how do we ensure that the work that we do, the producing of the good information, scales as well as it possibly can do? And so very interested in a big old debate around those things. And how do you describe it? The geopolitical consequences of this? Love that. Sounds great.
Anthony, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Anthony Labelle. I'm a representative or co-founder of Label for AI, which is an independent and sovereign provider of digital watermarking and advanced forensics technologies. So we can reveal if there is an intervention of Gen AI into an image, a document, a sound, or a video. For the text, for instance, this is not very efficient, so we don't provide text detection tools. I don't know if you're familiar with digital watermarking. Digital watermarking can be seen as an ID deeply embedded into an invisible into the content that you can extract only if you have a secret algorithm. So if content is an output from an AI generator, we will mark directly at the end of the server the content, because it's the best moment, because this is the sole moment that we are sure that it's AI generated. And when the content is live into the web, the watermark is still embedded, and we can always extract his original ID. Watermarking will play a very important role in the next years, because there is a European regulation called European Artificial Intelligence Act, and in the Article 50 you can see a new obligation from Gen AI provider models, which is you have to systematically mark with a multi-layer technique. I will go into details after, every output of the Gen AI model. And this kind of watermark will help tomorrow fact checker or fraud, for example, anti-fraud services, to know what is the nature of the content I can see now. I just want to say about disinformation. Disinformation is a very difficult field, in fact, for us, because it's very compressed into social network. Metadata are stripped or modified or falsified in a way to have a wrong position about this content. And there is an intention always. The manipulation are intellectually not bad, to go to a special goal from this guy who have manipulated a content. So typically, it's not our ICP, because there is, in fact, nobody is ready to pay to fight against disinformation. I talk about a private actor, of course. For public actors, this is not the same. But it's a very difficult, because if there is now, a big movement of everybody mobilized to combat misinformation, we have a problem. So we have to find some technical solutions, systematic, and that's why the European regulation, which is a regulation, you can see the same kind of regulation in China, South Korea, California or other country, because there was a Hiroshima process. I don't know if you remember it. On the Hiroshima process, had a question. The question was, how can we do to identify generated content, because there will be more and more pregnant into the ecosystem. Maybe I can talk 2 minutes about advanced forensics. What is forensics? You know, forensics is you have to investigate directly into the content to find out if there is some traces, micro-signals, artifact, or signature of diffusion model. It's a statistical tool, in fact. You can be certain of something with forensics. With watermark, if the watermark is robust and secure, I will go again on these notions, it's not the same. You have more chance to have a false results with forensics than with a robust and secure watermark. Maybe it's certainty. Some watermarks can give certainty about the nature of the content. Our watermark is this kind of watermark. Just before you take the, I have to go again into two notions: robustness and security about watermark. What it is? Robustness is the capacity of a watermark to resist to common transformation on the web, like compression, like screenshots, like cropping, like resizing, or the all together on a content. And the security is not the same. The security is the ability to a watermark to not be deleted or imitated, because if there is a case, we have a big problem, because false can be right can be false, and vice versa.
So I think we've got a couple of different areas to address, and this is obviously a topic where we need several weeks to even define the problem. We have 45 minutes to solve the world's issues in this area. So I'd like to start, to break it down into a couple of categories. So we have technology, we have laws, regulations, we have the economic incentives or disincentives, we have norms, and we have social factors beyond norms, education, for example. How do we deal with this, right? I think we're getting fairly focused into the technology side of things, because one of the scary aspects of AI-driven disinformation is the automation, is the economies of scale that even a single actor, let alone a state troll farm, can generate. Maybe Andrew, I think one topic that we have here is this idea of individualized targeting of disinfo. Some of you may have seen, maybe a year and a half ago, there's the German right-wing party that will not be named, did a sympathizer, a xenophobic video, immigrants out, to a soundtrack. I mean, for the time, it was pretty slick, right? The thing that came to mind was some of the Daesh ISIS videos from the mid-2000s in terms of production values. These kinds of things we can increasingly see, I think, individualized, targeted at grandma and grandpa who may not have the norms, the education, the training, the technology to detect these things. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are the impacts of this? What are we seeing? What are your predictions in how we're going to see individuals succumb to, for example, electoral disinformation?
Yeah, really good question. So I think elections are a really good example of the kind of thing that are under threat from the increase in volume of the kind of AI-generated information and the decrease in the barrier to entry if you want to run a campaign. And I say that because that is quite obvious in terms of what we're seeing online, that what could be a nation state could also be a bored teenager in terms of the information that's produced. And so the attributing for knowing the motive becomes really important. And a lot of the information that we see online that is AI generated at scale is actually to make money. It's people who are looking to try and just generate stuff to get enough shares, to get enough kind of focus, to get enough ideas online so that they can get into a higher tier on TikTok's reward program. And they will just produce anything that is shocking and shareable because that is what they're looking to do for notoriety. And that is different to the kind of people who are looking to influence. And so we've got to look at, I think, the underlying motivation, and it's not always as simple as we want it to be. And in terms of that personalization, of course, AI allows two clear things, I think. So one is near infinite multivariate testing. So you just want to run a bunch of different things and just see what sticks. AI is brilliant for that. Fantastic. It also is the hard to judge, but personalized experience. And we know that we've had targeting stuff for a while. The idea of targeted information around elections is not new. That's a decade old.
No, it's worsened by having by the algorithmic reality of individualized targeted information already.
Exactly. And so, but what we are seeing is an increase in that. And I think what we're seeing here is the lack of common truth. And I think that is something that we really got to focus on. That if I were to ask, insert your LLM of choice here, but to Grok or to ChatGPT or Claude, a particular question, based on what I've done previously, I'm going to get a different response to any of you. And that is something that gives us pause, because where is the authoritative truth in that? Because you've got something that is designed to be persuasive, designed to be your friend, designed to validate your ideals, is giving you information that only you are seeing. That is really challenging. And so that's where it comes back to. It's a technology thing, absolutely. The foundations of some of this is going to be in watermarking, open standards, all of those kind of things. But also it's going to be in legislation that is fit for purpose and designed on a principles and risk basis rather than trying to keep up with technology. And it's going to be about media literacy. I know it's an old-fashioned thing, but we've got to ensure that we keep on engaging with how do people consume information online, because it is changing. And if we're not keeping up with that, we are leaving a bunch of people very, very susceptible to some damaging information.
I want to jump on a topic that is I think preparatory for another thing I'd like to ask you, but maybe Anthony. Andrew mentioned before we shouldn't, if I got my notes correctly, we shouldn't be fact-checking with AI, right? But let's talk about at least detecting false information, right? About technologies. You talk about watermarking. What are some of the I think we don't want to keep this too negative, the world is full of problems, but what are some of the opportunities we have, for example, for using LLMs and other technologies for detecting false information, deepfakes, et cetera? You're shaking your head. The reason I ask this, I had a panel about 2 years ago with a researcher at the Technical University in Zurich who does video Gen AI research. And his theory was that we're engaged in about a 5 to 10 year arms race in his prediction, at which point it will no longer be possible even for LLMs to detect LLM-generated false content. So what are your thoughts on actually using the technology to spot content like this?
You just mentioned generative AI to know if there is to know the nature of the content. I don't recommend it because, as you know, Gen AI can hallucinate. It's always the case for forensics, for example. Just play a little game. Take a Gen AI image and put in a credit, you know, your name or photograph credit, and the response of the Gen AI will be, it's an authentic one. Vice versa. If you take the Gemini star in real images, what will be the response of the model? It will be, it's generated because it just recognizes the star of Gemini. So I don't recommend it. We use science. We have strong roots with French public research labs, CNRS, in RIA, because of that. Because we can't play with hallucination or bias to fight disinformation. It's counterproductive, in fact. So humans can't fight machines. So that's why the regulation is here in the world, because you need automation against automation. And that's why it will be systematic to multi-mark every output of models.
What about decentralized AI? What about decentralized LLMs? Now, you will be required to mark things, but if you're running a, let's see, localized DeepSeek, right? China doesn't care about European regulations.
China has a regulation.
They have their own,
yes, since September last year.
A Chinese actor providing, I mean, there is not going to be a lot of motivation from Chinese, I think it's telecoms regulator, to regulate some kid who is providing, you know, informal, on GitHub somewhere, LLMs to somebody on their laptop. How do we deal with this?
In fact, I don't know if I understand correctly your question, but you know, China is very protective for keep the control about information and to protect their citizens, because there was some case of phishing, famous phishing with a famous Chinese actor to make money, as simply as that. So they plan to watermark every model, DeepSeek, for example.
Iranian, Brazilian, Thai.
Brazilian, it's another thing. I think they are thinking about this kind of regulation. In Brazil, for example? Yeah?
Well, the question, I think the question for me is that we force, for example, OpenAI, right? Or Google, or Anthropic, to include watermarking technologies. Yeah. But this is not going to include decentralized open source projects, for example.
Yes, of course. Okay,
exactly.
okay.
So
Yes,
how do we deal with this kind of decentralized capability?
I understand. Okay, watermark is clearly to keep people honest. So it's a thing. Okay, it's not against states. We are prepared to attack with disinformation of very big tools. No. That's why forensics is very important, because if there is no signals or watermark or metadata or something into the content, you have nothing. You have nothing to investigate. So you need to investigate directly, morphologically into the content to know if there is some traces. So that's why. It's a shame because European regulation mentioned forensics but as an optional layer. And I think it's a mistake. It's a shame that Kalina is not here today because I would like to discuss with her about this problem. It's a big one. But forensics could, as a fallback layer, manage with typically models we are not obliged, or we will not want to watermark their output.
Andrew's dying to jump in on this one as well.
No, I think it's a really important thing of, I suppose there's 2 points here of understanding if something is being AI generated is not the same as whether it's good or bad. We can't assume that if it's AI generated, it's definitely bad. People can make real, organic, free-range, human-created content that is very bad and AI-generated content that is good. So that is only ever part of the process. But also on this decentralization kind of idea, if we have all of these great standards in these large models that are used by lots of people, that is a good thing. That is absolutely a good thing. But it does push those who wish to sow division or produce bad content into different places, and the barrier to entry for that is lower and lower as lower. We can run large language models on a laptop. We can run them on very little technology, and that means that if it doesn't exhibit these signals, we are going to need to go back to some of these forensic things as well. The not seeing synth ID baked into something is not the same as it being not AI generated, and so it's a murky world. Regulation will help us, but these techniques are going to push people into a less regulated world, and that is going to continue, I believe.
There's something you mentioned which really touched me, which was I have had one senior cybersecurity management job in my life, and hopefully never again. One of the most useful tools was Singaporean financial services regulation, because when my budget was being cut, I was able to say, "Oh, talk to the Singaporeans. I sure fire all my guys," and all of a sudden I got my budget. And this ties into this concept of I think one of you guys was mentioning who there's nobody wants to pay for fighting disinformation, right? What role does regulation have? I think, again, when we're talking, we're getting away from the decentralized thing. When we're talking about platforms and companies, what role does regulation play in forcing organizations to fight disinformation? Part one of my question. Part two of my question, when we were preparing for this, Andrew, you mentioned MCP, government-run MCP servers, right? Would it make sense for government agencies, if regulation is such a constructive motivation for companies to actually invest resources in platforms particularly, but not only, fighting disinformation, to actually provide constructive resources to help them do that? So I'll let you guys decide who wants to answer what.
I take the question one, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. The regulation has planned to commit first diffusion model to mark their outputs. Okay, it's a thing. Second part, how do the public can access to the detector to manage? If I want to know if it's a real or if it's a fake, I need a detector. So where are the detectors, and are they protected against adversarial attacks, for example? But the third step of the regulation is to force every platform to take the watermark and metadata which are embedded, you understand it, into the content, and to repercute it directly on the consumer. So there is a full chain of traceability of a content. It's the theory. I'm sure X will not do it in the future year, but for the regulation point of view, they should be. But okay, he said the 3 steps are there into the mind of the European regulator.
Yeah, so I think just to build on that, from a regulation point of view, I think it's interesting. So large platforms, billion dollar organizations, kind of get to mark their own homework when it comes to regulation. A lot of the time it's a principles base where they can do something, they can have a program, and I think we need to really dive into that. I work for a small organization that had $1 million worth of funding pulled by Google last year. That doesn't seem like a great investment in this space, but I'd say that's pretty connected to some political pressure from the US. And I think one of the things that we're talking about platforms, or no one wants to pay for disinformation. I represent a number of fact checkers, 50 fact checking organizations across Europe. We're producing a central database of our information with the idea that it's not just the fact checks, but it's the working out. How did we come to that conclusion? What sources did we check? Why did we trust that? We want to provide more information and then make that available under license so that people can fund this work. They can use it to improve their models, but they can also sustain the need for somebody to be involved in this process. And then I think that does talk to this government point. We're talking about model context protocol. We're talking about the idea of if we're trying to find good information online in the world of AI, we need to be better at surfacing up that good information. Some people are really good at this. Often civil society and government is very bad at this. Stuff is hidden in PDF files or in obscure CSV files or probably in Excel with some color coding in there somewhere and some conditional formatting, and it's just painful.
Or in the case of Spain, in a giant wall of impenetrable text on a website somewhere.
Oh, yeah. We've got the horror stories every which way you look on this kind of stuff. And things, AI can make this easier. If we've got agents out there, sort of agentic AI, finding information to help you fill in your taxes, it will find your obscure PDF. It will do something with it. So it's sort of democratizing this information. But I think governments taking, and sort of a broader definition of civil society, taking a step forward and thinking about, okay, how do we build that layer on top of our information to make it easier to engage with, just feels like this is something that a lot of people need to spend time on, and some progressive technical projects and governments are doing this, but more is needed to ensure that we are quicker to access the good information, and vitally, it's very boring words, but with the context and caveats around it, like, can I use this information? What do I need to know about it? And is it appropriate for me to use in this way if I'm a human, if I'm an AI agent, if I'm a language model?
Whose job is it to determine that? With the C word, the censorship word came up in our initial conversation. How do we, you mentioned before good versus bad content. And there was another topic that we discussed, for example, non-malicious misinformation. Wrong Google search summaries, which there's some very fun ways of turning off. But whose job it is to decide this? And how do we categorize between, the good and the bad, quote unquote?
Thank you. So I think, I think it's really important that freedom of speech is an incredibly important thing online, and that has something that needs to be protected. That needs to be protected across Europe. That needs to be protected around the world, and we can't lose sight of that. I think fact checking and the kind of work I'm talking about is the opposite of censorship. It's about adding information online. It's about adding context. And I think that's very, very important. And increasingly, it's about making sure that the information that is produced, the good stuff, the expert voice, fact checkers, academics, experts, is lifted up. And how do we ensure that that happens? And so that example I gave of Meta products where you had that little pop-up, that's probably the most seen iteration of our content. I work for a tiny organization, there's 25 of us. Our content is seen billions of times a year because we have these integrations with platforms, and somebody, a product manager in Silicon Valley, is making a choice about how to show that content. And other platforms can do this as well. And so thinking about where do you want to add context? And I think that comes back to the idea of harm as well. Harm is really hard to define, but I think systematically, we can define, codify what that looks like and talk about information that we see online, because there is a difference of, there's a picture of the Pope in a puffer jacket. It's AI generated. It's cool. It made me smile. That's fine. There is information that's telling you not to vote in the Albanian elections. That is not so fine. We need to talk about these things not as similar content, but as radically different things that need different interventions. And that is a conversation that society needs to have.
You're allowed to vote in the Albanian elections? I think this is maybe one for Anthony first. You're the founder of a software company, so I think I know what your opinion on this is going to be. In Europe, one of our advantages is that we still have a very vibrant, both public and private media landscape, right? Very combative. And the traditional quote-unquote media company is not dead. In the US and some other countries, it's a slightly different picture. A lot of countries like Australia, the UK, they sometimes have, well, I guess the UK less so, have monocultures. I have here in one of my notes is media versus software and tools, right? Where are we going to see the focus for identifying disinformation content, harmful content? What do you predict as, is there going to be a shift from looking for or I guess more misinformation on traditional media to the auto-generated content on social media platforms, YouTube, TikTok, whatever? And what is, what do you see as the growth in the role of technology and technology companies in that, as opposed to, let's say, for example, centralized, ministries that deal with things like accrediting, licensing television stations, enforcing fairness doctrines, that kind of thing?
There is another topic in your question. It's a question of the sovereignty of who can say it's authentic or it's a fake, and it's a power of God, traditionally. So it's very important to have in Europe some independent verification players, because if, for example, Google is very in advance about watermarking. They have a multimodal watermarking called Saint ID. So if you something of Gemini, there is a watermarking visible inside. But if the power of this verification is only into the hands of big tech, US or Chinese, we have a very big problem. That's why we are advocating with some other player. I have to say that we are contributing with another French player, which is Kix, with a representative is here today. Kix is providing secured metadata, and we are providing forensics on watermark. It's the different layers imposed by the regulation. And this is a sovereign initiative, typically, because to reinforce the power of European citizens, we need to go on players which are really European into their structure, capital, and tools that we use every day. So it's a very, very important question of how do we organize an independent verification system directly into Europe, because I don't want to recall the geopolitical situation, but we have a big problem.
I think one last question for Andrew before I ask you for your closing statements. We have some time, so make them as long as you want, within reason. You mentioned something I wanted to call you out on in our preparatory call, that we should focus. You mentioned before, the question for you is, does it cause harm? And in our preparatory call, you mentioned that you think we should focus on outcomes rather than motivation. For me, I mainly deal with cyber threat intel as a topic of how do we attack infrastructure, systems, societies, and disinformation. For me, it's very important, who is the actor, right? Is it a state actor? Is it a Russian troll farm? Why do you say motivation is less important than the actual outcome, the impact?
I think it's because they become so blurred at the moment. As I say, if we were talking a while back and we were talking about coordinated campaigns from China or Iran, that would have a certain set of characteristics. And now, if we're looking at a coordinated campaign from someone who wants to make a quick buck, they look quite similar. And so I think it's I am interested in the impact that it will have, because some of those things don't land and some of those things do land, and they can be very, very similar in the way that they manifest themselves.
You're referring, I assume, to the, well, I think a lot of them were Nigerian and also initially Macedonian disinfo campaigns on social media that weren't driven by state actors, but rather just engagement.
Exactly. So engagement farming and state actors can look very similar, and so I'm interested in the consequences of those things, because if engagement farming is going to stop somebody taking medicine, that is important to me. And so that's where the harm stuff comes from. And also because fact-checking is about providing evidence, and it's then evidence that can be used to think about changing systems. So I look at a fact-check as not just something that is a one and done, we publish it and hope the world gets better. What we try and do is to use them as identifying patterns that we can then think about how to change. And that can be as simple as asking an official statistics office to change the name of their PDF because it's been weaponized in misinformation somewhere. We saw that around vaccine hesitancy. Or it could be looking for changes in electoral law, it could be changing platform policy. And so finding the information, understanding how many people are seeing it and how they're reacting to it, and what they might do about it, allows us to stack these things up and be advocacy organizations. And so fact-checking individually is about a claim. As a collective, as the network, it is about systems change. And systems change comes no matter on the motivation, it's about the outcome, because we can see the examples, the impact it's having on citizens, and the change that we can call from that comes from that.
But provocatively, following up on that quickly, I mean, wouldn't understanding, again, what the motivation and thus the actors are help us identify campaigns and how to track trends and campaigns and even create predictions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think I am not trying to dismiss the importance of the intention. One of the projects I've worked on recently as part of the European network is to try and map misinformation on short-form video at scale to try and make a sort of a weather forecast for how information is moving around Europe. So we can see this kind of thing is happening in Spain from these kind of actors. We're expecting that to move into France, into the UK. So at scale with motivation is a really, really important part of it, but it is just, I want to make sure it is not the only component to our work.
Quick wrap-up statements from both of you guys. What do we do going forward? What are the next steps, recommendations, call to action?
First of all, you just talk about evidence. I have the conviction that tomorrow the question will not remain, is it authentic or is it generated? Tomorrow it will be how many signals of authenticity do I have in this content, or how many signals of generating AI I have to the content. I will have to manage it, to deal with it, I want to say. Because the truth, the verity comes from a philosophical notion to a technical notion tomorrow. It's not very good news, but it's the world we just face today. And I want to conclude just because we are very proud to have won two awards into the FIC contest this year. Donc, I want to conclude by the European innovation is not dead on the fight of authenticity and generated AI content faculty to identify the nature of the content. We are not lost. We have some company like us, like Kix again. We've just launched a joint offer with Kix for AI model providers to mark their output, and it's very cheap, it's very eco-friendly, and it's very seamless for organizations. And we are advocating and we are committed into this fight by the way of technology. That's right, but not the way of fact-checking or other trends that are vital to address the problematic. But well, it's my final word. Good luck with the new age of information.
Yeah, two things for me. I think the first one is it's important that we hold on to hope. Our organizations are incredibly hopeful because it's pretty audacious to think that you can have any impact on the information environment as a tiny group of people, but we can, and we will continue to do so. And this is not a lost battle. We don't have to assume that everything online is lost or won't be believed. It is ours to reclaim, it is ours to own as we want to. And the second is about money, basically. A lack of it inside this system. work for a collection of small charities, NGOs. We've seen Google pull out all of their money from this sector. We've seen Meta pull out its funding for fact-checking in the US and unclear about what it's going to do around the rest of the world. We need significant and institutional funding. Significant for us, tiny for most people's budgets. But if Meta were to pull their funding from fact-checking in Europe, it would decimate our sector. And honestly, I think you would miss us when we're gone. So if any of you have access to institutional funding or structural funding, please speak to me, because this stuff is important. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you very much. This is great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate it. We're even on time.
We are.
Swiss precision. Well done.
2 minutes over, but
No,
you're
we started
good.
late.
You're 2
We
minutes
started
over.
late. Thank you very much to both of our panelists.
Thank you, John.
Benoit, we found out he's apparently joining us today last minute. I hope, Kalina, if you're listening to this, I hope you get better soon. Thanks very much. All of you, I wish you a very nice conference. Thank you for coming and your patience and your attention. And wish you all a very nice day and a disinformation-free next election cycle, wherever you are.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.